Thank you, Senator Wyden. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Bernanke. Thanks for coming here to testify. I don't envy your task. It seems to me that you've been given the task of trying to address fiscal mismanagement with monetary solutions, and it just doesn't work long term. I think we're seeing that starting to collapse in Europe as people have tried to come to the rescue of Greece, and I'm just not sure how far we are behind Greece. The argument here in terms of getting our fiscal house in order, long-term sustainability, seems to certainly break down between how much revenue can we raise and how much we spend. And to me, it's just clearly a spending problem. 10 years ago, we spent $1.9 trillion. Last year, we spent $3.6 trillion, and according to the President's budget in 10 years, he would like to spend $5.8 trillion. And I am concerned that we delude ourselves in thinking that we can actually increase revenue by potentially raising tax rates or trying to get us up above the 50-year average of 18.1% of revenue extracted from this economy. I mean, our long-term spending is 20.2%. So over the last 50 years, we've just run this 2.1% structural deficit. And there was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal today about Maryland's attempt to tax millionaires. When they did that back in 2007, they estimated they would raise $330 million by doing that. In fact, a study was just produced, said that they raised about $120 million, about 36% of the raised revenue. So I'd just kind of like to get your comments on the federal government's ability to extract more than that 50-year 18.1% long-term average in revenue.
Well, first on the broad question of spending and taxes, you know, there's a deep philosophical debate about the appropriate role of government, the appropriate size of government, and you're obviously quite aware of that. And that's something Congress is going to have to work out. That's what people elected you to do, is to figure out the right role of government in the economy. You know, I think that it's true that beyond a certain point, higher taxes impose costs on the efficiency of the economy, and those are trade-offs that Congress has to consider. So in particular, in a situation like a state where millionaires could easily cross the border and live in Virginia instead of in Maryland, it's clear that much of the gain could be lost simply by legal avoidance practices.
As an accountant, as a business manager, I'm always looking for the root cause of problems. And I'm also looking for key metrics. And you mentioned one earlier, the size of our debt in relationship to GDP. Mm-hmm. I think an even more fundamental one really speaks to the root cause of the problem, which I would argue is the size, the scope, all the control, all the intrusion of government into our lives, all the regulation, the cost of government. We've increased that from that 20.2% average over 50 years to 25% in 2009-24. It's projected, according to the Heritage Foundation, to increase to 35% by 2035. You know, in the end, socialism, communism is a number, and the number is the size of government in relationship to the economy. Do you think 24, 25% and higher as a metric of the size of government in relationship to our economy, you think that's a healthy metric?
Senator, under the current plans, if there's no change to our entitlement programs, then the demand for spending, the amount of spending that the government's committed to, is going to rise even beyond that level. So at some point, Congress is going to have to make a trade-off between, you know, what its spending programs are and what taxes it's willing to raise. I've often said that I'm in favor of the law of arithmetic. If you want a low-tax economy, which has benefits from an efficiency perspective, you got to make the tough decisions on the spending side, and vice versa. If you want to spend more, you got to figure out how to raise taxes and raise the revenues. So I mainly try to urge Congress to make sure they're looking at both sides so that there's a balance between the two.
Of course, those tough decisions really do begin with presidential leadership. I mean, I'm new to this town. I've never seen anything really accomplished in Washington without very strong presidential leadership, and I'm afraid President Obama has just been you know, phoning it in here the last couple of years in terms of our debt and deficit issue. One question I would have is, I probably don't have a whole lot of time for it, in terms of the uncertainty caused by not the Senate passing a budget. And I realize with the Budget Control Act, we have deemed a few numbers. But can you just speak to the lack of an actual plan that makes sense to certainly business people, to consumers? Can you speak to how harmful that is in terms of economic growth?
Well, Senator, I'm not going to comment on parliamentary maneuverings, but Senator Wyden made exactly the same question. You know, is uncertainty about the future of the tax code, government programs, and so on a negative for growth? I think it is, because firms like to have certainty, like to be able to plan. And again, I would take on the same responsibility as a regulator, that we need to make regulations as clear and as effective as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.